Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our channel, U.S. Immigration News. DHS seeking IRS data on taxpayers thought to be in the U.S. illegally. The Department of Homeland Security has requested the Internal Revenue Service to share taxpayer data, including addresses and contact details, of individuals suspected of being in the U.S. illegally. This request is part of the Trump administration's broader immigration enforcement strategy, aiming to track undocumented immigrants and investigate businesses that may be hiring them. The Department of Homeland Security has requested the home addresses of potential undocumented immigrants from the Internal Revenue Service. Sources familiar with the matter told ABC News. As part of its efforts to ramp up the Trump administration's immigration enforcement agenda, the tax agency rejected an initial request and is now in discussions over how to accommodate DHS without violating tax privacy laws. Sources told ABC News. DHS is seeking to provide names to the IRS in exchange for home addresses, phone numbers, and email addresses, an administration official told ABC News. Section 6103 of the Federal Tax Code requires the IRS to keep individual taxpayer information confidential with certain exceptions. The IRS has allowed undocumented immigrants to file income tax returns with individual taxpayer identification numbers. Undocumented immigrants contributed $25.7 billion in Social Security taxes using borrowed or fraudulent Social Security numbers, according to Bipartisan Policy Center. DHS has also asked the agency for auditors, investigators, and accountants to help investigate businesses that may be hiring undocumented immigrants not authorized to work in the U.S., and is seeking the agency's help targeting financial networks supporting trafficking organizations, the sources said. Last month, DHS formally requested to deputize IRS agents from the Treasury Department for help with immigration enforcement. The Washington Post was the first to report the DHS request to the IRS for taxpayer information and resources. A spokesperson for the IRS and the DHS did not respond to a request for comment. DHS asks IRS for the addresses of people believed to be in the U.S. illegally. The tax agency has so far refused to give immigration enforcement officials home addresses for 700,000 individuals. People familiar with the issue said. DHS also asked for skilled auditors to investigate businesses. Internal Revenue Service leaders rejected a recent request from immigration enforcement officials to divulge the home addresses of 700,000 people suspected of being in the country illegally, rebuffing a Trump administration attempt to leverage the tax service to assist a sweeping immigration crackdown. In a memo obtained by the Washington Post, Department of Homeland Security authorities asked the IRS on Thursday to connect the names of potentially undocumented immigrants with the people's last known addresses, phone numbers, and email addresses. It follows a DHS request roughly 2 weeks ago that would allow immigration officials to provide a list of names to the IRS in hopes of obtaining home addresses from the tax agency, according to 5 people familiar with the situation who spoke on the condition of anonymity out of fear of professional reprisals. IRS leaders initially rejected the DHS requests, the people said, and are attempting to negotiate terms to assist immigration enforcement officials without violating tax privacy laws. The memo suggested the creation of a team of IRS officials to review taxpayer data, so it is not accessed by DHS personnel. At the end of the workday Friday, though, a new acting IRS commissioner, Melanie Krause, took over the agency and quickly indicated she was interested in exploring how to comply with the DHS request, 2 of the people said. As of late Friday night, it did not appear that the IRS would immediately be able to turn over the information DHS sought. DHS's Thursday memo also asked the IRS to deploy dozens of highly skilled IRS auditors and criminal investigators to launch probes of businesses suspected of hiring immigrants not authorized to work in the United States. IRS investigations should be conducted, and assistance should be provided without regard for any threshold, floor, or internal policy for opening an investigation, the memo states. Further, IRS should provide leads on businesses that are circumventing tax laws or violating worksite-related statutes, many of which are from prior leads or complaints that IRS did not investigate due to not meeting internal IRS policy for opening an investigation. The memo and requests have prompted deep alarm within the IRS, the people said. Providing taxpayer information to third parties is punishable by civil and criminal penalties, and other government entities are forbidden from ordering tax investigations. People familiar with the DHS's request described them as Nixonian, referring to how President Richard M. Nixon's administration used the IRS to collect information about perceived enemies. Abuse of the tax system was one of the articles of impeachment filed against Nixon in 1974, though he resigned before impeachment proceeded. The IRS has reassured undocumented immigrants for years that their information is confidential and that it would be safe for them to file income tax returns reflecting their earnings without fear of being deported. When some immigrants were rattled about filing taxes after Trump took office in 2017, the IRS said the law doesn't allow the agency to share personal tax information with another government agency. There is no authorization under this provision to share tax data with ICE. The IRS said then, referring to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, part of the DHS. Representatives from the Department of Homeland Security and IRS did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Undocumented immigrants pay billions of dollars in federal taxes every year by filing annual returns or having money withheld from their paychecks. An estimated half, possibly more, of the roughly 11 million undocumented immigrants in the country file income tax returns to document their contributions to the United States, researchers say. Because most are ineligible for Social Security numbers, the IRS allows them to file with individual taxpayer numbers, known as ITINs, instead. Tax data can provide precise information about potentially undocumented immigrants, including their addresses, family structures, and bank and employment information, experts say. But even a taxpayer's name and home address are considered protected data under federal law, said Nina Olson, who is a national taxpayer advocate, the IRS's internal watchdog, from 2001 to 2019. These 700,000 names, do they sound like Jones and Smith, or do they sound like Rodriguez and Garcia? Said Dorothy A. Brown, who studies tax policy and racial disparities at the Georgetown University Law Center, referring to the list the DHS sought to send to the IRS. This is racial profiling on steroids. A federal official who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss the sensitive issue said IC may view the IRS databases as valuable for pinpointing undocumented immigrants because tax returns often contain recent information such as current workplaces, names, and ages of children and home addresses. ICE is tracking nearly 8 million undocumented immigrants on its deportation docket, but immigrants often do not update their addresses with the enforcement agency. Sharing taxpayer information would mark a major reversal for the IRS. Many immigrants proudly file tax returns and save them in hopes that a record of paying taxes will bolster their efforts to apply for legal residency one day if Congress passes a law allowing it. On its website, the IRS says undocumented immigrants are subject to U.S. taxes despite their legal status. Undocumented workers' wages are subject to the same tax withholding and reporting requirements that apply to other U.S. residents. But working illegally is a risk. Workers and employers who hire them could face fines or criminal prosecution. Even though the IRS doesn't share taxpayer information, the agency's criminal division has teamed up on investigations with the DHS in the past. That is a possible tactic for the new Trump administration, which is increasingly seeking to file criminal charges against immigrants who are in the United States illegally. For instance, Homeland Security investigations and the IRS jointly investigated a human smuggling network that was funneling workers who were from Mexico, El Salvador, Indonesia, and Guatemala to Gracie's Chinese Cuisine, a restaurant in Evansville, Indiana. The investigation began in 2020 during Trump's first term and ended under Joe Biden's. The owner pleaded guilty to transporting and harboring undocumented workers and money laundering in 2022 and was sentenced to time served and ordered to pay a $30,000 fine and forfeit his truck. The restaurant also pleaded guilty to unlawful employment of undocumented workers and was sentenced to 2 years probation and fined $15,000. The IRS's rejection of DHS's request underscores significant legal and ethical concerns surrounding taxpayer confidentiality. While DHS views IRS data as a valuable tool for immigration enforcement, compliance would mark a major shift in IRS policy and raise serious privacy issues.
Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel US Immigration News. We hope you are doing great. In this video, we are going to talk about DHS seeking IRS data on taxpayer thought to be in the US illegally. The Department of Homeland Security has requested that the Internal Revenue Service provide home addresses, phone numbers, and email addresses of individuals suspected of being in the US illegally, aiming to enhance immigration enforcement under the Trump administration. The IRS has refused the request so far, citing Section 6103 of the Federal Tax Code, which mandates strict confidentiality of taxpayer information except under a specific condition. Many undocumented immigrants file tax return using individuals' taxpayer identification number and contribute significantly to federal revenues, including an estimated $25.7 billion in Social Security taxes despite lacking legal work authorization. DHS has also sought assistance from IRS auditors, investigators, and accountants to scrutinize businesses suspected of hiring undocumented workers. Additionally, DHS is requesting IRS cooperation in targeting financial networks that support human trafficking operations. A DHS memo emphasized the need for IRS tax investigations against businesses potentially violating tax laws, even in case where previous IRS policies would not have allowed such props. A DHS request 2 weeks ago sought to link the names of suspected undocumented immigrants with their last known addresses and contact details. The Washington Post first reported this request, noting that IRS leadership initially rejected it but is now in discussion about a potential compromise. One proposal suggests an internal IRS review team to handle taxpayer data without allowing direct DHS access. However, concern over legality and ethics have arisen, with some comparing the request to Nixon-era abuses of IRS power for political purposes. The IRS has long assured undocumented immigrants that their tax data would remain confidential, which has encouraged them to file return. An estimated half of the 11 million undocumented immigrants in the US file taxes, often hoping their compliance might help in future legal residency applications. Immigration and Customs Enforcement considers IRS tax data particularly valuable for tracking undocumented individuals, given its accuracy in recording addresses, workplaces, and financial information. While IRS criminal investigators have previously worked with DHS on human trafficking and illegal employment cases, directly sharing taxpayer information would represent a major shift in IRS policy, raising serious privacy and legal concern.